Here's a question that almost nobody has thought to ask, and that almost nobody has tried to answer seriously. Modern humans have spent billions of dollars developing products, treatments, and technologies around menstruation. There are entire industries built on the assumption that the menstrual cycle is a monthly inconvenience requiring management. So how did a species without any of that, no products, no hormonal interventions, no ibuprofen, no reliable calendars, manage it for 300,000 years? The real answer is more interesting than most people expect, and parts of it are genuinely counterintuitive, including the possibility that for significant portions of human prehistory, for many women, the monthly period as we experience it today may have been considerably less frequent than it is now. The first thing to understand is that the menstrual cycle your body runs is not an unalterable biological constant. It is deeply sensitive to the body's assessment of its own resources. Body fat, specifically, plays a central regulatory role. Menstruation requires a minimum body fat percentage, approximately 17% to initiate and approximately 22% to sustain regular cycles. Below those thresholds, the body's reproductive system downregulates. Ovulation becomes irregular or stops. Menstruation becomes infrequent or absent. This is not a dysfunction. It is the body correctly assessing that current conditions are not suitable for the caloric demands of pregnancy and lactation, and responding accordingly. Hunter-gatherer women had different body compositions than modern sedentary women. They moved more, ate differently, and experienced seasonal variation in food availability that modern people rarely encounter. During periods of reduced food availability, body fat would have dropped. The menstrual cycle would have responded. Which raises the question, how often were ancient women actually menstruating? Here's the estimate that reframes everything. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer populations and extrapolating from ethnographic data have proposed that women in prehistoric foraging societies may have experienced significantly fewer lifetime menstrual cycles than modern women do. The estimate: modern women in industrialized societies typically experience approximately 400 to 450 menstrual cycles in a lifetime, from menarche to menopause. Anthropologists Beverly Strassmann and others studying the Dogon people of Mali, a traditional society, estimated that women in less industrialized contexts might experience approximately 100 menstrual cycles over their lifetime. The difference comes from later menarche, later onset of puberty in nutritionally stressed environments, more frequent pregnancy, extended breastfeeding that suppresses ovulation for years at a time, and seasonal reduction in body fat that periodically interrupted cycling. Ancient menstruation was not a monthly certainty. It was a variable, contextual biological event. So what did they do when it happened? If your brain is asking questions it never thought to ask before, that means this is working. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. UG has been wondering about this for a while too. The archaeological evidence for prehistoric menstrual management is sparse, which is itself informative. Organic materials degrade. Soft plant matter, animal hides, moss, and fiber leave almost no trace in the archaeological record. This doesn't mean prehistoric women weren't managing menstruation. It means the materials they used don't preserve well. What the ethnographic record, documentation of how traditional societies without modern products have managed menstruation, does show is consistent and practical, absorbent plant material. Moss, specifically, appears repeatedly across cultures as a pragmatic solution. Certain mosses have natural absorbency comparable to modern products, along with antimicrobial properties that may have been recognized empirically even without understanding the mechanism. Soft grass, plant fiber, and animal hides prepared for softness also appear in the ethnographic literature. The archaeological record does contain some relevant evidence, though it tends to come from more recent periods than the deep Paleolithic. The Newt Cache shelter in eastern Kentucky, a site used by Native American women, contained materials that archaeologists have interpreted as consistent with a space used during menstruation. Soft plant fibers, bedding materials, medicinal plants. This is not direct evidence of period products in the Paleolithic, but it is evidence that designated materials and spaces for menstruation existed in hunter-gatherer cultures. The deeper question, what was the cultural framing around menstruation in prehistoric societies, is harder to answer. The evidence that exists comes from much later written records and from the extraordinary cross-cultural diversity of menstrual practices documented by anthropologists in the 20th century. That diversity ranges from menstrual seclusion practices that restricted women's movement and social participation to societies where menstruation carried little social weight or restriction. Strassmann's long-term study of the Dogon people in Mali provides one of the most detailed pictures of traditional menstrual practice in a non-industrialized context. Dogon women using menstrual huts were menstruating at rates she could verify against blood hormone analysis, and the rates were dramatically lower than modern industrial world equivalents. Consistent with the extended breastfeeding and nutritional variation patterns the anthropological estimates predict. Here's the implication that connects back to biology. Extended breastfeeding is the most significant single factor suppressing ovulation and menstruation in traditional societies. A hunter-gatherer woman who nursed her child for 3 to 4 years, which is consistent with what is documented in traditional foraging societies, compared to the global average of less than a year in industrialized countries, would experience lactational amenorrhea for much of that period. She might go years between menstrual cycles during her reproductive years. This is not a minor variation. It is a fundamentally different relationship with the menstrual cycle than the one most modern women experience. The monthly period as an unavoidable, regular monthly event is, in significant part, a product of modern reproductive patterns, earlier weaning, fewer pregnancies, lower nutritional stress, rather than an ancient universal constant. Here's the finding that connects ancient menstruation to modern health in a way that researchers are still working through. Gynecologist Elsamar Coutinho, in his 1999 book Is Menstruation Obsolete?, co-written with Sheldon Siegel, made a provocative argument that the reproductive pattern of modern industrialized women, with 400-plus lifetime menstrual cycles, is evolutionarily novel, and that some modern conditions associated with repeated cycling might reflect that novelty. Endometriosis, fibroids, and certain forms of premenstrual dysphoric disorder are significantly more common in modern industrialized populations than in populations with fewer lifetime cycles. Whether this is causal or correlational, whether more cycling is driving these conditions or whether the same factors that produce more cycling also produce the conditions, is not fully resolved. But the pattern is real. The modern menstrual experience is different from the ancient one, in measurable ways. The biology of lactational amenorrhea, the suppression of ovulation and menstruation through breastfeeding, is worth understanding specifically because it is one of the most underappreciated facts about how the human reproductive system actually works. During exclusive breastfeeding, particularly when the infant is feeding frequently throughout the day and night, the high levels of prolactin required to maintain milk production suppress the release of GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which is required to trigger the hormonal cascade that produces ovulation and menstruation. The suppression is not complete or perfectly reliable, but it is significant, particularly in the first 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding and often for considerably longer in frequent nursing patterns. In a hunter-gatherer context, where infants were typically nursed on demand, frequently, including at night, and for extended periods of years rather than months, lactational amenorrhea would have provided extended suppression of cycling for much of a woman's reproductive years. Not complete suppression, pregnancies still occurred, but meaningful and extended. Here's the thing that almost never gets mentioned in the modern conversation about menstruation. This pattern was not just relevant to ancient women. It is still biologically operational in modern women who breastfeed extensively. The system hasn't changed. What changed is the cultural practice around it, the timing of weaning, the introduction of supplemental feeding, the frequency of nursing, which changed the duration and reliability of the suppression. The evolutionary picture, then, is something like this. Human female reproductive biology was shaped in an environment where extended, frequent nursing was the norm, where seasonal nutritional variation was common, where first pregnancy typically occurred in the late teens after menarche at 15 to 17, and where the lifetime count of menstrual cycles was a fraction of what modern industrialized women experience. That biology is still the biology modern women have. The environment it's running in is radically different. What ancient women did to manage menstruation when it occurred was pragmatic and material. Absorbent plant materials, designated spaces, culturally variable frameworks for understanding and marking the experience. None of it is clearly documentable in the Paleolithic archaeological record because the materials don't preserve. What is documentable is the biology. The system was running less frequently, for most women, for most of their reproductive years, than it does today. And the management technology, such as it was probably less elaborate than you'd expect, because the need was less frequent than you'd expect. The monthly period as a constant, inescapable monthly feature of adult womanhood is, in significant part, a product of the modern reproductive context, not an ancient universal. Step back, and the question, how did ancient humans handle periods, has an unexpected answer at its core. For much of human prehistory, for many women, the question arose less often than you might think. Extended nursing suppressed cycling for years at a time. Nutritional stress periodically interrupted it. Later, menarche compressed the window at the beginning. The result was a lifetime menstrual cycle count that was a fraction of what modern women in industrialized societies experience. The technology for managing it when it occurred was pragmatic and organic. Plant materials, designated spaces, culturally specific practices. None of it is perfectly reconstructible from the archaeological record. The honest answer to what did they use is probably absorbent plant materials, and we can't be more specific than that for the deep Paleolithic. But the deeper and more interesting answer is the biology was running a different program than it runs in the modern world. The monthly period as a constant monthly feature of adult life is itself, in significant part, a product of modernity. The ancient system was designed for a different rhythm. It's still running in you. It just has different inputs. Here's the one thing. If you experience significant premenstrual symptoms, difficult periods, or cycle-related disruptions, and you're wondering whether this is normal or something to address, the evolutionary context is worth holding alongside the medical conversation. Your cycle is running in a body that was shaped in conditions where the cycle ran less frequently, with different nutritional inputs, different movement patterns, and different hormonal rhythms from extended nursing. The conditions have changed dramatically. The biology has not had enough time to catch up. This doesn't mean your symptoms aren't real, aren't worth treating, or are something you should just accept as the price of modern life. It means that some of what feels like your body not working right may be your body working exactly as designed, in conditions it wasn't designed for. That context doesn't replace talking to a doctor, but it might change how you frame the conversation. Your body isn't failing the modern world. The modern world is new enough that your body hasn't yet been asked whether it agrees. And if the idea that your body's most intimate biological rhythms were shaped by conditions that no longer exist and are now running in an environment they weren't built for, stays with you, there's more where that came from. The same mismatch that shapes your cycle also shapes your teeth. How ancient humans kept their teeth perfect without toothbrushes, and what we did to ruin the system, that one's next.